Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Unzip.media podcast, where we unpack great stories with the people who write and create them. Today we are going to talk about phones, mobile phones and other small electronics. First about how we charge them, at least here in Europe, and then about how we build a healthier relationship with them. And to discuss all this, I have invited to our makeshift studio Callum Booth, a freelance journalist, editor, former colleague, old friend, presenter, everything, really. Callum, thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the show.
No worries. What an intro. All you missed out there was Dreamweaver, thought leader.
Perfect. But oh my God, yeah, AI expert?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, you've got to be an AI expert.
Everyone is an AI expert these days.
I know what ChatGPT is, and I know how to use it. And I think in terms of LinkedIn, that makes me more of an expert than most people who claim to be one.
Do you often come to LinkedIn these days?
Unfortunately, that's the nature of being a freelance journalist.
Yeah.
There was a time when I was a staff writer, staff editor, and I could completely avoid LinkedIn, and then I could just go about my business. But these days, you've got to have some
that was the perfect life without LinkedIn. Yeah. Now, first, I want to talk about charging. And you wrote a piece for The Verge a couple of months ago, and that went about the famous directive 2022/2380.
Catchy as always.
Yeah, exactly. So what was that about? What was that directive actually?
Well, the directive, effectively, it's commonly known as the USB-C charging directive. Mm-hmm. There are a few different parts to it, but the one that really got the most headlines was the EU requires most consumer electronics to be equipped with a USB-C port. I think they refer to it as like radio electronics, but that kind of is a broad category. Like Bluetooth, for example, can be considered a radio technology.
Everything that sort of emits radio waves, I guess.
Exactly. Right? So it's a huge, broad-ranging category, but I think for most people it just fits nicely as consumer electronics, the stuff you walk around. So there are a few regulations. I think there's a like 100-watt upper limit of this charging capacity. So what that means is a PlayStation 5, I think, requires 350 watts of power to run, so that doesn't need to run via USB-C. But like a Nintendo Switch uses 6 watts of power, that is something that then falls under this directive.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, and the whole idea of the directive is that everything has to be now sold with the USB-C charging port.
Yeah, everything apart from laptops. That's the one there. There's until April 2026, I believe. The EU requires all laptops to charge with it. But that's not it's kind of not the full story of the USB-C, because you can have proprietary cables on there as well.
Like MagSafe.
MagSafe is a perfect example, because a MacBook can charge also by USB-C. It has that option. You can keep MagSafe as well. So it's not saying necessarily that every gadget can't have any specialist or proprietary connectors. It simply has to also charge via USB-C as well.
Right. And what is the rationale actually behind it? What is it for? Why does it make sense at all?
I think it's for a few reasons. One thing the EU always pushed was about e-waste, just about the number of different cables and connectors and how all this comes together. Another big reason, I think, is just the standardization for consumer ease. Having like one cable that plugs into everything, one charger that works across everything, is something that the EU's kind of drive towards consumer satisfaction worked.
Yeah. It's a dream. I mean, I still have a whole lot of micro USB stuff around the house.
Yeah, I kind of like it. I always feel like a little bit of a mad scientist when I'm plugging in different cables and all that. And whenever, because I still have lots of different devices, I have like a Apple Watch, USB-C stuff, a speaker that's still on micro USB, a few different things. It's like when I go away, it's like putting them all together and like a little travel kit. I find it very entertaining.
Like one of the camera substitutes in this room is actually an older iPhone 7, which has 2 different adapters plugged into it.
There we go. That's the future that the EU is trying to protect.
That's like lightning to micro USB and micro USB to USB-C.
Oh, what a dream.
Yeah, perfect. And for example, like stuff like drones, they are like small as well. Do drones also need to be?
Yeah, so there's some of this that is also a little bit unclear about what particularly falls under this category, because there's a drone. So drones aren't mentioned directly at the time the regulation came in, but they might also be seen as a camera effectively. So it's
yeah, that's true. That's true. A lot of them are just like that.
Yeah, so it's all about how you define that and how that fits in. But generally, those are kind of edge cases. With any sort of regulation like this, there will always be, things on the side that don't fully match up or don't fully meet the categories. But I think the EU's done a pretty decent job in defining generally what it is with its kind of regulations about kind of power and what needs to be connected. And then it also named a lot of other devices from e-readers to headphones to wired headphones. And one interesting thing as well is it doesn't touch wireless charging.
Okay.
That's a completely different thing.
But wireless chargers themselves, do they need to have like a USB-C port now?
No, so I believe that's
the pucks themselves.
Yeah, from far as I'm aware, they don't have to. They don't have to have that. But my guess is that any manufacturer is going to use USB-C these days. It's been a long while if you're doing that sort of power take.
And I'm just wondering, so like if you look at Apple, for example, I wonder if you know it at all. Are they have they moved entirely to USB-C, or is it like a European thing for them, or any other manufacturers?
Yeah. I believe Apple with the 16e now doesn't sell any iPhones with a Lightning cable. If I remember correctly, I think they might still sell like a keyboard outside of Europe that still has a Lightning connector. But I think the company's been aware of this for a long time. This regulation, I think, was kind of pushed through around 2022, something like that.
Yeah, well, like everything else that comes to the European bureaucracy. But I wonder about the sort of effects and impact of this regulation. Did this push Apple over the line of going full on USB Type-C?
I think it definitely had to play a part, if only for nothing else but the strength that Apple fought against it. You would assume that if Apple had already decided to use USB-C, it wouldn't have kicked up such a fuss and taken and pushed the EU legally and tried to do everything it could. What makes you really feel that if that was in Apple's direct road plan, you think it would have been like, okay, fine. We're planning on doing that anyway, which I'm not entirely sure why. I think probably Lightning cables are a bit of a moneymaker.
Yeah.
I think the Lightning cable is a format owned by Apple. Every time it was used, people had to pay a kickback. And the thing about a company like Apple is its entire reason for being is to make more money. Like the only reason it exists in order to grow, in order to make shareholders money. And, it does good stuff for people, but it will never, ever want to get into a situation where it loses money without the opportunity for opening up more.
Right.
So you can look at it with the reason it stopped selling the iPod or discontinues a range is because it can make more money by selling you songs on a phone or by selling you broader services. Anything Apple discontinues always plans to make money.
Yeah, that's fair. And you mentioned that it tried to fight the entire thing legally. What was it about? Do you still remember? When was it?
I think it was around that time, like 2022, just saying that the EU couldn't force companies to do that effectively. The full details, it's, these long legal cases like with tech giants.
Right. And there was also part of this regulation that went around the charging bricks, right?
Yep. So the regulation split into a few different sectors. So the big one that we began with and we spoke about is that USB-C on everything. But there are also a couple of other elements that were involved. So one was labeling. Basically every device has to basically have how it can be charged, like what speed it can be, what wattage it needs. Which, if you've ever actually looked at consumer electronics recently, it's a bizarre minefield. It's very hard to actually know what power it takes, what cable you get in. The other one about charging bricks, which you mentioned, was about unbundling charging bricks. So that means
which Apple already has done, in fact, right?
Yes, exactly. But this means that any device you buy inside the EU, now you have to have the option to not have a charging brick included. But the slightly irritating thing on this is that, so what that means in practice is that most companies will not include a charging brick anymore.
Yeah, most likely.
Which means that then you have to buy it separately. You don't have to, the companies don't have to offer say an iPhone. I know we've done that, or let's just say like a Samsung Galaxy. It doesn't have to offer Galaxy with charging cable, with charging brick, and Galaxy without charging brick, it will just sell the one without the charging brick.
Okay, I see.
And then
I
as
see
long
what
as
you
you have the option to buy a charging brick, then that fits in with the EU regulations.
But that's like direct savings for the companies, I suppose, for the vendors.
My guess is if it's annoying companies to USB-C, maybe this is like an EU, like a little envelope across the table, being like, okay, we'll save you some money on charging bricks. But again, this also comes back to the e-waste thing, which is a big topic in the EU's mind of stopping all these charging bricks being, just turned into landfill or left around people's homes.
I guess we both have a whole lot of those at home.
Yeah, but again,
I have an entire box.
But kind of going back to the labeling thing, I have no idea what any of them really are in terms of wattage, like in terms of what they actually produce or what they're capable of. And that kind of ties into the final part of this particular directive, which is the unification of fast charging.
Mm-hmm.
So basically there are a range of different fast charging protocols. So the most common one, or the most standard one, is USB PD, like power delivery.
Power delivery, yeah.
That's the one that ties in. But then you also have companies like Oppo that have their own version of it that's like Super VOOC. And some of those chargers wouldn't actually provide the full capability the charger could through USB PD.
Mm-hmm.
So this part of this regulation as well, the USB-C regulation, is ensuring that any charger can actually submit the amount of power that it can, the highest amount it can, through USB PD.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it starts to get like so many different acronyms and phrases coming in. But effectively, it just means that USB PD can't be hampered and has to be part of, like, any fast charger now sold in Europe that can fast charge has to support USB PD as a standard. It doesn't, like, similar to the USB cables plugging in.
Yeah.
They don't need to not support a company's proprietary fast charging, because Oppo, for example, does some insane, they do kind of ones where it's like, 30 minutes charge from 0 to 100. They have some very insane text.
And then you get microwaved in the process, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. You just put like a little bit of macaroni on your phone, and then you make yourself dinner while you charge it up as well. It's a great combo.
Most likely. Oh yeah, no, I don't have that kind of phone. Like, I have the Pixel, but okay. So, but probably a good thing then, though, right?
The whole regulation.
The entire thing, but also the harmonization of power delivery, because right now it's such a zoo. Really, I don't fully understand usually what's going on around.
I think so. I think that's with the labeling and the fast charging. I think the EU is trying to force standardization on those things, and I do really think this is one of those elements that the EU is very good for, because there's no other body in the world that will push this, and companies are likely to be like, well, if we have to put it on the box in the EU, we may as well just put it on the box everywhere. So it's something that will probably spread across the world and make it a little bit easier for people to understand what cables, or not cables, sorry, what power devices have to use in order to charge.
No, that makes sense. So, I mean, it's understandable for like bigger companies that would just not be able to sell stuff here or to distributors in Europe. But how about, I know myself, ordering something from a Chinese web shop that comes with whatever charging port? How are they going to enforce it, if at all?
It's always the big question with the EU, right? Like, how is enforcing going to happen? I think in the EU regulations, that falls onto the countries themselves.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah, and then the customs will just open every box to check what kind of charging port
that is the problem.
Have. Okay.
But countries should have effectively bodies checking this, and then instilling whatever penalties they are, going from fines, I think, all the way to banning that company's electronics. So yeah, it really depends on the country and how they're doing it. You would like to think that there is something happening and there is some dialogue. So let's say, a team in Italy finds something from a company that's importing from India or China or wherever, and then they can spread that information to the rest of those bodies operating in each individual EU member state. But I think it is the big problem with the EU that it's, people don't always like big government and the amount of money that gets put in and the amount of money it costs. But when you get to the minutiae of these things, you just need a lot of people working on it in order to make it happen. But again, with these things, a lot of the time is that if you're trying to change standards, if you're trying to reduce e-waste, the big companies are the ones that are shifting the most products. So there's almost definitely going to be stuff slipping through the cracks. But I think you could probably say, 90%, 95%, if not more, of the devices shipped and used over here will be from a large company. So they will fall under some jurisdiction or some focus. There will be people looking at Apple. There will be people looking at Samsung.
No, absolutely. Now, so what I also wanted to ask is, usually what happens with stories in general that journalists write, there's always stuff that sort of doesn't make it into the story. Was there anything interesting that sort of you learned along the way of working on this one that you didn't end up including?
Yeah, there are a few bits just because they open up an entirely new world. So one that came to mind, so there's a different directive for charging bricks. So charging bricks weren't actually included in this directive. So they're currently discussing making one that charging bricks are regulated.
As in, like, what port is on the charging brick itself?
But what port, what power is being put out? Because at the minute, this is all effectively device side.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think at the minute there's no regulation as long as if you have your charging brick that goes into a wall, as long as the side that connects to your device is USB-C, it's fine.
Oh, right.
Or your device is able to accept that USB PD power amount. It's fine. What hasn't been fully weaved in is that charging brick and how this all connects up. It really feels like two jigsaw pieces kind of being smushed together from two different sets, and you're trying to make them fit, which is incredibly tough. That is a hard thing to do. But that's one element. Another thing that I would have loved to have dived into a bit more is there's no talk about cables.
Okay.
So, of course, cables have completely different quality, power loads, speed, and at the minute, there is, as far as I'm aware, there is no way to get a cable from my drawer, look at it, and be like, this is a USB-C that's capable of 80 watts of power transfer. There's no way. Unless
it says so on the thing, which I have a couple of like that.
Yeah, there are a few out there, but it's wild that we have this thing that we use every day that are potential fire hazards, that are the lifeblood of everything coming through, and there's no standardization on the quality, on what power load they can accept, how that works. That is a real Wild West area, and you'd think that it would be better for the planet, for e-waste, if every cable had to have a clear marker of how it comes on, and that's very fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, we might as well just come up with something like they have on the Ethernet cables, right? Like this category sort of thing. You could just make like categories. Yeah, you have 5, you have 6, you have 7. You might as well categorize a USB cable as well. That would be really nice, actually.
Then you just have it on there, and it's just done. Yeah, that would be.
And at least to know whether it's just like a power cable or it has data capabilities, and also whether it's a Thunderbolt compatible. Okay, that's just terrible.
Yeah, it goes all the way in. And I think probably the final thing, which would have been a piece in its own sense, which I mentioned in the article but didn't delve into, is what this does about port advancement and cable advancement. Right. Because, of course, you are limited by the thickness and the width of USB-C. So I think there was, I can't remember the name of it, but I think basically at the Galaxy event, they just announced their thinnest ever phone. And it's basically only a smidge larger than the USB-C slot.
And it can't be thinner. There's no way it can be thinner, right?
Exactly. Which, you could argue, does anything need to be thinner than that? But it does hamper. That. And you imagine if someone wanted to create a super thin phone that you literally just have almost a paper length connector that goes in, that would be impossible in its current instance. Yeah. And then, of course, you have the idea, well, what if someone comes up with a better standard than USB-C? How does that work? Which I think there are some answers for. One, USB-C is very, very good. And advances in battery charging, power distribution, everything in that sort of field, we are a long way away from making the sort of leaps that would improve data transfer, power transfer, and cables like that would outstrip USB-C. So that's not something that's going to happen. You know, people like throwing that out as a potential reason. I think it's unlikely to happen. The second one about that is if something like that does exist, the EU has said these regulations can be changed. We can switch them. Of course, the worry is that with anything with these big regulatory bodies, it would take a couple of years to come in. But the EU has written that into the directive that it can be changed, it can be altered. So that is the expectation.
Okay.
And I guess thirdly, realistically, we know the next stage is portless, right? Like that's going to be the next stage when it comes to like the big leap when you just kind of use a wireless charger for data transfer. That's kind of what lots of companies are reportedly working on in the background, trying to make, of course, when it comes to waterproof, dust resistance, age, like a portless phone with transfer and charging that's like fast is kind of where the industry is heading. So it's very unlikely that USB-C will be taken out. But of course, if you're a device manufacturer looking to experiment, that's probably still, that's not like a great salve, but it is just it's the way it is. Sometimes you kind of need a greater good, right? Like I do think that harmonizing USB-C is better for consumers, it's better for the environment. So sometimes you just have to suck it, big company.
True. Okay, and to wrap this one up, another question that I had is we have a whole lot of conversations currently in the tech circles that Europe is basically over-regulating the space. Do you think this is an example of that, or do you think this is like okay?
I think it's good. I think it's got people in mind. You know, a lot of these regulations are trying to make things clearer for the person on the street. I think it's trying to make it easier to charge and easier to have single devices. I would say generally a positive thing. Of course, there is always a little bit of because it kind of almost feels like your personal freedom is being taken away, right? Like I think there's a nature of humanity where we personify items. So a lightning cable, for example, I've used it for so many years that for whatever reason I have affection towards it. So being told I can't use it, I think there's sometimes this like, oh, how dare you? I'll use whatever cable I want. But I think that's like an innate thing, and then you can look past it and just see the clearer, greater good here, and also just trying to stop companies saying, oh, we've got this new phone and you're also going to have to buy a cable just from us. You know, it's amazing that USB even exists as a standard, that the companies have agreed to it and get involved in it. And I think sometimes they just need that little extra push. And I think this does that without being overly restrictive or overly regulatory in this one instance.
Right. Now that makes sense. Now, Callum, thank you so much for this. We have a lot more to talk about, and we will be right back in a few seconds. And we are back, and now we can move on to the second part of the conversation, and that is sort of like a bonus one for this one, and it will be about something that is called the Great Uncoupling. And this is like a philosophical concept, can we call it that you have introduced recently?
Yeah, effectively. So I write a newsletter, a Substack called The Rectangle. Go check it out, therectangle.substack.com. I'm sure it will be on the links.
Absolutely.
Sign up. And it's basically a mission I'm on. I quite like the idea of a philosophical journey. That sounds quite nice. About decoupling from my phone, effectively.
Right.
So it goes back to at the end of last year. I went through I woke up one day, played on my phone, put it on charge, picked it up, and the screen was just unresponsive. It came on, but I couldn't do anything with it. And then I rushed around town trying to get it fixed. No one could get it to work. And, I was just about to go back for Christmas. And I realized everything I have is on this phone. Like how I listen to music, how I listen to podcasts, how I get on flights, how I do my internet banking, how I communicate with people. Everything was on my phone. I couldn't log into internet banking online because you need a mobile number. So I basically realized in this moment that I was effectively just in thrall to my phone. And this was kind of like the crux of the point, the thing that really exploded. Before then, I think a lot of people probably have the same thing. I'm just too addicted to my phone.
Yeah.
Not only being on it, but
I'm still in that camp.
Yeah, but I think the thing that I really dislike is, let's say you go, I want to look up the directions to this restaurant. Look up directions. Then before you know it, you've logged on to social media, you're gone on Twitter, you're browsing Reddit, you're on Instagram, and just 10 or 15 minutes have just gone for what should be a short little task. And those kind of two things coalesced with this idea, this kind of series I'm running called The Great Uncoupling. So the idea is, I've tried several things in the past of changing my relationship with my phone, whether that is using black and white mode to try and stop it being so engaging, using screen time to stop it going, like avoiding using it at the very beginning and the end of the day. But effectively, I guess you could call it behavior creep, just steps in. So you can manage that for a few weeks, and then it just becomes normal. Then you just you have a little shortcut that you just turn color back on. Screen time says you've used much of your time, you just like ignore. And then you just you say you're not going to use your phone to bookend the day, but you wake up and just end up looking at your phone anyway. So the key then with the Great Uncoupling was to think, okay, how can I change this? If I can't change my relationship with how I use my phone, then maybe I need to change how I use my phone. And the idea then is effectively re-cluttering my life with devices, moving away from the Swiss Army knife device and becoming more of a all-around specialist. So at the minute in the series, I'm on the second article, but of course I've progressed a bit further in my day-to-day life, and I kind of selected, I don't want to get rid of my phone. It's too useful. It's too good. I just don't want it to have it on me all the time.
Right.
So the goal then is looking at the elements that I need kind of in day to day and what other devices can support that. So for example, one of the ones that's been really helpful is an Apple Watch with cellular. So I can make phone calls, I can use directions, I can pay, I can listen to music, I can listen to podcasts. And that takes a lot of what I'd refer to as the functional load.
But you can't go on Twitter or Reddit on the watch.
Precisely.
Okay. That's so you're basically getting all these like sort of different devices back into your life in order to be able to keep your phone in your bag or wherever you keep it.
That's the goal.
Or did you leave it at home? Is it with you right now?
It is with me right now because I've never been to this place before.
Right.
So I've not quite. This is one of those things I'm trying to work out is when to not bring my phone with me. So I think the biggest issue I've bumped into is WhatsApp. Everyone's on WhatsApp in Europe, and there's no native WhatsApp app for the Apple Watch.
Oh, really?
So there's one way you can kind of get, or let me rephrase that. There's no native, fully functional one. You can get an app, and I think it gives you notifications, and then you can respond to those notifications. But I don't have any notifications on my watch on.
Oh, okay.
That ruined. Apart from like a phone call or when it tells me when I've hit like my movement goal, I'm not getting notifications from my apps on my phone. I'm not decoupling from that to have it repeated. That's the biggest issue, WhatsApp, because then you can't really communicate with people. There are a few workarounds, but they're just not very elegant.
Right. Okay. So where are you in the process? What have you come up with so far in terms of solutions?
So I mentioned the Apple Watch. That is
which Apple Watch is that?
The Ultra 2.
The Ultra 2. Okay.
So I was an Apple, thankfully, because I'm a big runner and I do a lot of exercise. I had an old Apple Watch that I got specifically for exercise, and then I used that so much. I was like, you know what? Having like an actual having something that's got the better battery life, the better performance, all of that really tied together. And thankfully this came at roughly the time my old one was dying. So it was like, yep, it's research, like it's fine.
Yeah, totally.
So that's very key because with cellular, that means I can make phone calls, you can listen to podcasts.
Just connects to the headset.
Yeah, you just connect to a pair of wireless headphones that you can keep on. I just use AirPods because they're just so easy. That's kind of the main driver for lots of things. Then on kind of my everyday carry, I have something called the Books. I think it's Books. Books, maybe that's a bit too Dutch, books.
Yeah, but BOOX, right?
Yeah, BOOX, so I guess it's books. So
it's like an e-reader?
Effectively, it's a Books Palmer 2. It's like a handheld e-reader, which is great. It's super useful. You can read books on it. Like it basically runs on Android, so you can get most important apps, but it doesn't have cellular.
All right.
So that
means...
it's
like an iPod Touch.
Yeah, pretty much. And you can... but, you know, obviously with Android, you can get like your banking apps. You can get, you can, you know, I use it for my Dutch language apps, for Kindle, I do have some music on there, but it's not so easy to browse with the e-ink screen. Some magazine subscriptions. It basically, that's a device that if you do need those moments where you're like in a cafe, you're waiting for a bus and you want to do something, then that encourages more long-form, engaged and useful activity. And I'm just not installing any social media apps on there, effectively. And then kind of if you're taking... and then the one that I'm experimenting with at the minute as well is using my iPod again.
Do you still have it then?
Yeah, it's right there. It's right there.
Oh, wow. That feels like a blast from the past. Which one is that?
That is the classic, I think, the 7th generation, 7.5.
So you didn't have to buy one, you had it already?
Yeah, I had one already, even though I'm currently in the process of getting one upgraded to not using
bigger
Bluetooth.
Storage?
Yeah, bigger storage, because I can't get all my music on there, and new battery, and new cases and stuff. So
how does it feel to be using it again?
It's great, like, because again, it's you know, I assume as many people grew up with that sort of thing, and having I have all my music on my iPhone anyway. But having it where it's a sole device for that means that when you are listening to music, you're far more zoned in, because you can all you can do on it is listen to music and browse through your music library. You can't browse for a bit and then hop back on to respond to an email or do something else. Yeah. So at the minute, those are the devices that I'm trying to use to like supplement my phone, to have my phone as still on my side, but basically, you know, my phone's in my backpack, but I've not taken it out of my backpack now for 2.5 hours, something like that. So it's there, and I'll definitely go back to it, but I just don't want to be, say, meet you here, come in, and then just be on my phone, you know? Which happens. It happens when you stop using your phone as much, you notice how much everyone is on their phone all the time.
Do you notice any positive impact, perhaps, on how you feel? Like, about yourself, maybe? I
mean, it's. I think a lot of it is just it's fun, you know. Like I like writing about this sort of stuff. I like thinking about it, so it's entertaining. Maybe one negative impact is it does make leaving places harder, because you're like, okay, do I have my music? Do I have my e-reader? What about directions? Do I use my phone for directions, or do I use my watch? Because watch, you can do it, but it's not quite as elegant. It's not as easy. The screen's not as big. You can't zoom in. You can't get all the details. It will get you there, but it just won't be as simple. So it's about finding that balance of what things I'm happy to keep my phone for, what things I want to kind of decouple as part of the Great Uncoupling from it.
Right. So is there a new story for the Rectangle upcoming with the
I think
with the first results?
Yeah, well, so I think the next step for the Rectangle, so far I've written 2 pieces on it. One, an introduction, one that then covered the beginning of this conversation, which was kind of the definition, like what is it that I want these devices to do, how is it going to work, what devices I'm going to select. Then I think the next pieces will be looking device specific. So I'll probably write about how using a Books Palmer 2 as I guess like an entertainment supplement, or like a backup. So, you know, something I need to do maybe is get on Wi-Fi on there, you know, maybe get WhatsApp on there and see if I can use it. The big thing that I'd love so much is if the Apple Watch could personal tether. Because if I could put a personal hotspot on my watch, sorry.
Yeah, it'll probably die very quickly.
It would die quickly. I wouldn't need it for long, but just so you could connect your Wi-Fi device to it, check a message, and then disconnect. Or, that would be, I would love that so much. But for the exact reason that you said, it will never happen. But the next step then will be writing about the Books Palmer 2 and the Apple Watch, and then probably the iPod. Mm-hmm. And then I guess it will come into a bigger piece about how they all interact together. And from there, I guess we'll see how it goes, right? Because I think I mentioned earlier, like behavior creep as a bit of an issue, that you're just, what you have done, you'll continue to do. Yeah. And my hope is that I'll avoid that on some level. Because it is also, when you're walking around the house, trying not to pick up your phone. Mm-hmm. Trying to put your phone somewhere that it's not like the thing that if you have a few minutes, you just reach towards. Trying to use, a different device to change that interaction. But yeah, it's the Great Uncoupling is an ongoing process.
All right.
Say that.
But in general, you see it like as a permanent sort of solution. So like you don't want to ever go back to having your phone as the only thing.
No, I don't think so. Like it would be, I'd like to keep it like this, but how that looks, because I don't, I really like the idea of, there's a big trend now of dumb phones and people removing from the phone so much, but I don't know, phone is great. Like that, it's such an incredible device.
It is.
Sometimes we forget about how amazing it is because it's also inflicted untold psychological damage on like the entire human population. But if you can find a way of using this tool well, then I think there's almost nothing like it for communication, for entertainment, for everything you can possibly be aware of. But you just got to find a way of making it fit in your life so it works for you rather than you kind of working for it.
Yeah, no, that's also true. Now, Callum, once again, thank you so much. Before we part ways, where can people find you?
Oh yeah, so I'm on social media, lots of places at Callum Booth or Callum R. Booth. Probably the best place to go is callumbooth.net.
Great.
That's my website that has pretty much everything on, but mainly go to therectangle.substack.com, and then you can find my newsletter and everything there.
And then also on LinkedIn to read all your AI expert
posts.
Just
head to LinkedIn. I never stop posting on LinkedIn. Some say a human can't physically write that much, but I say prove it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Now, this is it for the first episode of the podcast of unzip.media. The next one will be out in 2 weeks. In the meantime, please do go to unzip.media on the internet and subscribe to the newsletter, which comes also every other week. So we alternate newsletter and the podcast. And of course, you're always very, very much encouraged to support independent media and become a paid subscriber to the newsletter and this podcast. In the meantime, have a great week. Talk to you very soon and take care.